All right, let's get started, though I feel like we might have some folks bummed that we're going to put that hold music on hold. Thank you so much for joining us from all over the world. We have a fantastic global audience joining us today to talk about how we can accelerate customer-led growth with AI. So I'm pleased to kick things off by introducing today's moderator, Tim Sanders. Tim is VP of Research Insights at G2 and an executive fellow at the Digital Data Design Institute at Harvard. So, Tim, welcome on board. Please take it away.
Thank you very much, Karen. Such a pleasure to be here with everybody. I'd like to introduce our two speakers for this fireside discussion. I want to first introduce Keith Frankel. He recently joined Totango as Chief Product Officer, having previously served as CEO of Predictive AI, a company he co-founded to help businesses predict churn with over 99% accuracy and use their historical data as a source of customer intelligence to drive sustainable growth. He is a two-time AI tech founder with successful exits, and prior to that, he served as a director at HubSpot, helping guide the company through its IPO in 2014. Welcome, Keith.
Thanks, buddy.
The guy from the thing, or as I like to call you, the dude from the spot. I also want to introduce Alistair Rennie, co-CEO of Totango, a partner of G2's, by the way, and he became chief executive of the company in January 2023 after serving on the board as an executive in residence at Great Hill Partners growth equity firm. Alistair established a 20-year plus tenure at IBM in various leadership positions, including GM of IBM's analytics business unit, overseeing the development, marketing, and sales of the company's analytics software and services globally. Welcome, Alistair.
Hey, Tim, glad to be here.
This is going to be a really interesting discussion. I personally am looking forward to it, but let's set up the goals for this session. What we want to accomplish here is really three things. We want to align on a common definition, categorization of AI. I think that's a real challenge for a lot of folks, but we're going to really break it down in terms of key use cases, such as automation, optimization, and personalization. Think of those as the three main outputs of artificial intelligence. Then we'll talk about applications such as machine learning, generative AI, aka natural language processing, and then finally, the thing, agents, or commonly known as agentic AI. The second thing we want to accomplish is to be clear on how companies and leaders can think about leveraging AI to drive outcomes for their businesses. So what does it mean for companies individually and collectively within ecosystems? And how do we achieve democratization of data, insights, and the ability to act quickly and strategically? The final goal for this session is we want all of you to walk away with an understanding of where you can start today as a leader and how you can quickly create value in your organizations. All right, let's go back to that part one. We need to create alignment, consistency for how we talk about artificial intelligence and understand what it can do in the context of business solutions. So let's get the question started. I want to start with you, Alistair. What are the business use cases for AI as a prediction machine? Because that's what I think of AI as, a prediction machine. And what are the most relative business problems to solve?
Yep. So I think we should start with where you ended, Tim. The AI is a technology, and it's a powerful one, and it's moving quickly. And I think, as you say, it's a prediction machine. And you sort of say, okay, so we've had a long arc of BI to analytics, predictive analytics, machine learning. So what's really new? And I think what's new is the cost per prediction has dramatically changed in a lot of cases. Not everyone, but in a lot of cases. So the ability now to do something probabilistic about what might happen with your customer or an expansion or an event, the cost curve, even though AI is still pretty expensive, has fundamentally bent, largely because training is simpler, Understandability is simpler and easier. And I think applicability is going to be easier. So it is a fundamental sea change in the art of what is possible in a business. But that in and of itself does not change the fact that the starting point needs to be, I'm not running a business to deploy AI for the fun of it, to kind of get a check mark. I want to deploy AI to make a change in the way I deliver a great product or service to my customers, the way I bend or change a cost or financial curve. And I'm old, right? You described a lot of my analytics experience. The number one failure was always, there were always two, right? One was not really sure what we're going to do with the outcome. So we'll kind of come back to insight to action. And secondly, it was not really sure what is it we need to impact to make the business better for our customers or our stakeholders. So I kind of think about AI in three big buckets, 3+1. Like the simple one is personal productivity, and that's, I think we're all experimenting with how to use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever to kind of help us get tasks done. And I think it's great, and I think it's a wonderful way to learn, and I think everybody should do it. But I'm not sure that bends the curve structurally for a lot of businesses, but it's a really important place to start. So then I kind of think about, kind of the three things you talked about. Optimization. For the customers we work with at Totango, the business question they've been asking around customer success, customer-led growth is, how do I understand which customers are going to have the potential to leave me far ahead of time and do something about it? So I want to optimize that customer relationship. Which customers need more from me? How do I know about them? Which customers should I be selling to? So optimizing is a really big part of this, much more doable. The other, I think, starts to become automation. So once I know that, what can I do about it? Knowing the optimization is only 10% of the problem. How do I optimize it? And I think there's a lot of ways to do that in terms of both helping employees or your team know what action to take and doing it, right up to, and we'll probably talk about, fully automatic kind of agentic kind of approaches, which, will be interesting, but I think are far down the road. And then lastly, personalization. I mean, to a certain degree, I think everybody wants to be treated, with that notion of being a unit of one. I'm a cyclist. I use Trainer Road to train. And, with their AI and machine learning background now, I get a personal coach. I don't get a general plan. I think everybody would like to treat their customers as if you were their personal concierge. And I think the ability to scale that now is very high. So let me pause there, but I'm pretty excited about this. And I think there's some basic places to start.
And I want to put a pin on this last one, personalization. From Great Hill Partners, a lot of people always think in that business of growth equity, think about, what's the trophy when you're really approaching any type of innovation. So I want to show you something here for everybody that's watching the call. BCG just recently did some research that I think is really compelling. And when you take a look at what can drive the growth of a business the most sharply, personalization is the big one. And personalization becomes the big one, as you say, because not only do people want to be treated as a market of one, they're incredibly loyal to being treated as a market of one, right? So you talked about a lot of great things in those comments. I really want to zero in on predicting and then preventing churn, because I believe the two are inextricably linked, right? So this is where I want to come over to you, Keith, and have this conversation. So I want to frame, basically the same thing to you, but I do want to look at it a lot through that lens of, AI is a prediction machine. It takes information that you do have, and it produces information that you don't have, which can either give you an insight or, to Alistair, to your point, a variety of things like the ability to automate or personalize. What do you think are the most relevant business problems that you can solve with artificial intelligence as we sit here today, late 2024?
It's a great question. To touch on that, I'm actually going to first just touch on the way that you both framed what AI is, because I think of it slightly differently. I think as a prediction machine is certainly passes the sniff test. I sort of think of it more through the frames of almost like a pattern matching or pattern recognition machine. So if you think about sort of the big three buckets of AI that most people are talking about, trying to procure, going through evaluation tool process internally, you're looking at generative AI, basically looking at existing content in order to generate new content. You're looking at predictive AI, looking at past or historical to understand that in order to predict the future, some outcome, for example. And you're looking at, I think you mentioned it in the intro, sort of agentic, this idea of a machine being able to act autonomously, to make decisions. But the decisions it makes are based off of seeing what has been successful in the past. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's still basically pattern matching to the past. So
Right, that reasoning engine. Yeah.
Exactly right. So to me, the business cases are no different than the business problems we were trying to solve before AI.
Yes.
We're trying to grow our companies. We're trying to keep our customers, let's say specifically for maybe like a B2B enterprise. Let's get churn as low as possible. Let's run a sustainable business. Let's grow those customers more. Let's get more customers. I think we're solving the same problems, but now we have new tools to do so, right? Like personalization existed at HubSpot in the marketing automation days before we were mass rolling out AI or ML solutions, right? That was possible with rule-based systems, but AI and ML makes these things better, I should say. So going back to use case, obviously, selfishly, I'm going to talk about the use cases I'm interested in solving, which for a company like Totango is going to largely be, improving net revenue retention. So that's going to look at how do we keep more of our customers? How do we lose less of them? And how do we grow them over time? So we're talking about churn and expansion, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing is generative, predictive, agentic, all three of these can play a role in churn prediction, in expansion identification, so on and so forth. So for example, like let's take churn as a real business outcome here. So churn, I could use predictive AI to do historical analysis of my customer data, my historical churn, in order to predict a customer's likelihood to churn in the future. And I could do that with incredible accuracy at various time intervals out from their renewal date. Okay, so that would be using predictive AI to take historical data to predict some future outcome. But the outcome of these ML models are often difficult for, let's call it humanities graduates to understand. Okay, like if you're not a data scientist, if you don't have an engineering background, understanding SHAP values can be quite difficult. Okay, so being able to then translate that underlying metadata, the output of the model, into something that an individual contributor can understand to do their job, that's a great use case for generative AI, for LLMs. Okay, so we have a predictive AI, which analyzes historical customer data to predict future churn. We have a generative AI, which takes the output of that model and translates it into an easy to understand let's call it description of the state of a customer and why they're at risk. But then we want to do something about it. How do we actually intervene to remediate churn, ensure they renew, to drive expansion? That's agentic AI. Okay, so that's basically our ability to give the machine the ability to, let's say, pick which playbook that we automate to go after and intervene with the customer to ensure they don't churn. And maybe as part of that playbook, there's an email we send, which is generated using generative AI and sent to the company. You get where I'm going with this. So
I do. And if I could just interact here with you a little bit on this, I like this distinction you make between generative and agentic. And if I could provide an analogy
please,
that I think about a lot here. So, I think of generative AI, I think like ChatGPT.
That's right.
It's like an intern. I've had interns before, energetic. They really want to help. Sometimes they make things up to fill in the gaps. They're always going to have an answer for everything, but you have to sit really tightly on top of it, and you really don't put them directly in front of a customer, right? They're interns. They're helpful, but they're not autonomous, right? I think of agents like the best executive assistant you ever had. Like, think about that. So you think about the best EA you've ever had. They were intuitive. They moved across relationships. They could log into things on your behalf. You never lost a wink of sleep over it. I think that's the distinction. And that's why, to your point, Alistair, truly autonomous agents, or, EAs to scale, not quite ready for prime time, say, as we have this discussion. But one of the things you talked about that I thought was a very insightful thing, I don't want to miss this. You talked about the idea that, for the business user, like myself, political science, economics major, I don't talk tech. You said Chad, I thought you said Chad, for gosh sake. So yes, I get lost in the weeds for ML, even though ML's become the nickelback of AI. It's still a very technical thing. You mentioned that generative AI can more or less translate that into terms I can understand as a business person. I think that's incredibly important because, as I mentioned before, generative AI is part of the natural language processing discipline. And, the whole idea here is that if it works well, we now have this new interface to technology, data, and software called language, right? And so to your point, Keith, it's like one of the things I'm so excited about seeing in the last 2 years is the number of apps that were created by non-technical people that just explained it. And it got built, and not by a contractor for thousands and thousands of dollars, by generative AI. And it went on the App Store and became ranked. And I just think that's such a democratization and a breakthrough.
Yeah, that to me is the most interesting thing about AI. People talk about automation, and if you take that to its nth degree, we're talking automating people away, or at least parts of people away, and there's cost savings there. But to me, democratization is the most interesting thing that AI can kind of unlock for us. Like SaaS is over 20 years old. All right, we have all these tools. SaaS has largely, the data in those tools has largely been owned, controlled, gate kept by the technical teams. This huge data infrastructure that we've built to integrate tools and send data to a warehouse and transform it and visualize it for all of that is designed to help an individual contributor on the front lines do their job better.
Yes.
But they're still gate kept from access via these other technical teams. AI basically democratizes our ability to, those people's ability to understand, to access, to, utilize that data to do their jobs better without this, like monolithic technical team structure that has historically owned all of those insights.
Yeah, that's a brilliant observation. And I'll put something up here and you'll probably chuckle. It's like, when people ask me, like, why did ChatGPT blow up and become the fastest growing thing that every CEO walked into a meeting and say, we got to have generative AI? I don't want to show my age here, but I've seen this show before. I saw this show in the mid 1990s when Netscape came out before, it took off, right? And that was the moment that everything became consumerized, democratized. You could actually use the thing for the first time without having to be a data scientist. So I love this observation. Alistair, I want to come back to you. How can businesses and business leaders think about the calibrations that also need to be considered when folding, AI intelligence into a business process? So, there's things to think about here. Is it about quality and accuracy of prediction? Is that an important calibration? Or our tolerance as leaders for errors, because there will be errors? Just on those two, what are some of your points of view there?
Well, so you made an interesting point, right? You've now got an agentic, you've got interns that are kind of free and have the best executive assistant in the world, and sort of in an uncontrolled world, you could have a million, virtual executive assistants and a million, sort of interns all doing their own thing, and even in a human world, that would be kind of scary. So I think you need to kind of think about this down a couple of different avenues, and it's really just a risk reward kind of a management framework, as you would do with any sort of new technology. So if I think about this, I would say for things that are going to, have to be generally right, but have a lot of human in the loop. So for example, I want to do some really great analytics on my account structures, know who's going to churn, know what to do about it. That, great, let's do that. But let's have a discussion then about human in the loop to kind of say, okay, so now what are we going to do programmatically before you kind of let everything run wild? So, what is the risk reward? Where does a human go in the loop? And, kind of what's the downside? So I would argue, the downside of being overly caring of a customer, you might worry about churning, is almost zero, right? You just have a better customer. If on the other hand, the risk reward is I'm going to fully automate end to end with no human in the loop and no experience and no guardrails, and I accidentally send horrible communications to every one of my customers, that's huge risk. Right. So it's just a very practical kind of risk reward. Can I live with this if it doesn't have some guardrails? Is it safe? And where does it fit in terms of the risk management kind of stuff around it? I would argue, great data, great analytics right now, probably, and I would highly recommend you're going to need human in the loop on as you get towards agentic. And then I think you're going to have to see, real guardrails and frameworks and software around agentic to make sure that, you have dials.
Yeah.
I
I think
completely,
that's really, but go
completely
ahead,
agree
Keith.
with this. Yeah, just I'll ground this in actual use case, this human in the loop, which I think is largely overlooked, but we're talking about practical application of this technology. Like most people I talk to have gotten to the point of almost being allergic to the suggestion that AI is going to be this silver bullet solution for them. And they're like, okay, but what do I actually do with it? Okay, why do I care about this? And I think that grounding this in practical cases is important. So I'll go back to what we're working on here, Unison. Okay, so idea behind Unison, basically churn intelligence product. We use predictive AI to do historical analysis of customer data to accurately predict future churn as far out from renewal event as possible. Okay. This technology actually came to Totango via a recent acquisition of my prior company, Parative AI, which you mentioned. And we had a long history of basically doing predictive AI with enterprises at Parative. One thing we noticed that was always really interesting is we would build these highly predictive churn mechanisms, models, to essentially score a customer's likelihood to renew or churn, a very, very smart health score, you could think of it. But we could cater the model using human inputs after it had developed to make sure that it didn't accidentally miss any potential churn. So when we built a model, the model would say, true, they're at risk, or false, they're not at risk. But in this practical use case, teams that we would sell to, revenue orgs and success teams, they rather be safe than sorry. So with their input, we could actually tune the model to be more likely to flag a false positive, meaning flag someone as potential to churn, even if the actual model without human input didn't flag them as such. And that was hugely important for them because the risk of missing it is too great. They rather be safe than sorry. And we would see the same thing with human-derived inputs into the model. Sure. Okay, so remember, I like to think of it as pattern matching. Let's look at past behaviors to predict some future thing. Okay, if we see that an admin has a job change on LinkedIn, we know that is a huge flag for churn risk. Okay, one of our customers has gone to a different company.
Right.
Okay, but if we don't have the history of that data, the AI is not going to build a model that incorporates it. So what we would do is we would have this initial model that was grounded in all this historical data, could still predict, but then allow for human-informed overrides on that model or inputs on that model. So if we provide Unison, if we provide G2 intent signals, and we can see that one of your customers is actually looking at competitors, we have no history of that data, but it doesn't mean that shouldn't have a big impact on the actual assessment of that customer's risk. So AI is like a foundation on which we can build, we can layer on other human-powered or human-derived inputs as well to get an overall better outcome.
I think that's...
Can I
That's
just
great.
build on what
Alistair,
Keith said?
yes.
Yeah. So the second part of what's so important about what Keith is saying and what we're talking about here is so many projects around gaining data-driven or AI insights into a business have failed because the business never had the confidence in the outcome to do something about it. So there's kind of that in the small. Keith's talking about does the CS team or does the sales team believe it? But we're likely to find some really meaningful outcomes, down this path. For example, we are selling to the wrong customers, and we need to do something about that. That's a big discussion to have. That means humans have to have confidence in the data. They need to have confidence to act on it. Someone needs to, feel like they can change the business. And over and over and over again, I've seen projects where that level of thinking, that level of confidence, that level of believing what they're seeing and willingness to take action just results in a data science project that people look at, they read the reports, and they go back to business as usual. So building confidence in what these predictions are is going to be really important, and being comfortable that sometimes they're going to be wrong, right? This is not deterministic, it's probabilistic. So the first time you get a wrong answer from AI doesn't mean you throw AI out. But this notion of, will we do something with it, and do we have confidence, needs to be built. It won't be there. Or look at doctors. Like we know doctors are more effective using assistants, yet most doctors won't because of human issues, psychological
Right.
issues, bias issues, and that's going to happen in business if we don't build around it.
That's right.
I
That's
can
right.
give you I can give you an example of if you don't include the human in the process, how it goes awry. Our first customer at Parative years ago, doing a churn prediction model for their enterprise customers, a several thousand employee enterprise company, and we built the model. We had all these really interesting insights. We sat down to present them the model. We're so excited on these really interesting insights we uncovered. One of them was around how their premium support tiers actually do not correlate with renewal or churn. We get on the call with them, we show it to them, and they say, those support tiers haven't been live in like 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ouch.
So, and we ended up laughing about it after the fact, and we got to a great model in the end. But our first run at this, we were doing what a lot of people did. Like, we have the tech, let's direct the tech at this data set and let the data tell us everything we need to know, and then realized, oh wait, we're missing this human override where a 2-minute conversation with a well-informed human could have said, we don't worry about those support tiers, they don't exist anymore. And so the human
you
matters.
Obviously weren't meeting with Google, because the punchline of that story would have been, and then they called security. No, I'm just kidding. That's a great story. But for those of you watching, we've used this phrase human in the loop a lot. And if I could, I'd just, give you one illustration that I really like, that thinks a lot about, where do you need the human in the loop? Well, throughout the process, to be honest, right? So to this point, that well-informed human at a lot of, and this is of course more of a highly technical view of it, but it just shows you how many humans you have in the loop. And but I think that example is just memorable, Keith. But backing up just a click here. So Alistair, you talked about confidence in the data. I think this is a huge leadership issue. Not to be like always looking for analogies, but I think about artificial intelligence isn't much different than stealing this from you, Keith. It's not much different than like if you got a Tesla, and at some point you're like, are you really going to let Tesla pump the brakes for you? I mean, for me, the first time I rode in a Tesla with a friend, and he's like, oh, I never used the brakes. I'm like, it stops the car for me. I'm like, I don't know if I could trust it for that. I don't know if I could take my hands off the steering wheel. I feel like, Alistair, that's a leadership challenge when it comes to artificial intelligence, or even just letting the data drive the business. Now, obviously, you've done a good job of this, a great job of this. Totango is really confident in data. As a leader, how do you do that? Especially, say, with people that might be from different, generational cohorts that have been taught, trust but verify.
Yeah. Well, look, I think the first thing, the bad news for this morning is there's no magic. AI kind of from any kind of point of view, especially when it's applied to really specific business outcomes like churn or expansion, the foundation of that is going to be data that is correct. We're not going to bypass this notion, especially in large enterprises or enterprises of any kind, that it's going to be important to have a data pipeline that makes sense, is well integrated, and is put into kind of the condition that you can run AI and analytics on it. Part of the reason, and what we've heard so clearly from our customers is, for them, it's software plus expertise. We're going to help them, Unison plus experts on the kind of data that makes sense to get to an outcome quicker, especially when, folks don't want to be dependent on their IT team to run a data project. So, the bad news is no magic. The good news is, I think, approaches of software plus expertise to accelerate outcome, which is what our approach is going to make a big difference very, very quickly. I think the second thing people are going to have to kind of get comfortable with is their data interesting enough? Like, they're going to have to be rigorous to kind of say, is this anecdotal? Can we back test this? I mean, one of the things I love about what Keith and team do is, 2-year back testing to see if what we're looking at is actually, an interesting data anecdote, or is it actually actionable pattern matching that we can do something with? So, good old fashioned things like, back testing, looking at model drift, really getting comfortable with the kinds of controls you'd have to feel confident making decisions is going to be really, really important. And then I think, explainability. This is where I think generative meets data pipeline plus what Keith's been doing with machine learning. We need to put this stuff into the context that business people understand and can feel real about. Otherwise, what history has shown, these things don't turn into operational systems that, make a difference. They turn into data science projects that die in the basement. And that
That's
is a
right.
disaster.
Yep. No, I agree with you. And in my world of what they call chief evangelists, I've been on this train since the late 1990s. Guy Kawasaki was famously the first chief evangelist, right, at Apple, and then companies have had him since then. Right now, I see two kinds. I see the good old-fashioned advocate that's really pushing value proposition and change and transformation, all that stuff. But because of AI, there's now the explainer. So companies like NVIDIA, Snowflake, they've got people that are simply making AI business friendly.
The other thing I think people ought to be open to, and this is why I'm excited about the work we're doing and getting to know G2 a bit better. If in fact you kind of get through this and you discover that all the data you have isn't quite interesting enough yet,
right.
I mean, I would say don't despair. I think one of the amazing things about what's changing around AI and acquiring all sorts of different kinds of data is, then think about what else would you like to know and how do you use AI to capture it really quickly and cheaply. So, are there third parties that have amazing data that is not structured, for example, G2, to really understand what's going on in the marketplace and correlate that? Do you think about doing customer interactions and surveys differently to capture more data? So don't just think of AI and generative as a way of processing data you have. I think you think about it as a way of gaining more data quickly and cheaply to do more fast.
I think that's brilliant observation. Keith, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think in general, my experience is people also often overestimate how much data they need or how clean their data needs to be as well. It's like they're putting on their own guardrails. So just to continue to ground this in real use cases, another customer that for my prior company now, Unison here at Totango, that worked with us to do churn prediction. Well, part of what we would do would basically analyze data across any of 5 classes of data. So relationship data, contract data, usage, telemetry data, feedback, sentiment data, and then third-party market data. Think like G2 insights or ZoomInfo insights, job changes on LinkedIn, earnings reports, so on and so forth. What we would find is we would work with a company, and they were so excited to get an analysis across all 5 classes of data, as much data as possible. But we would end up getting a highly predictive model looking at just one class of data.
Yeah.
And only a handful of factors within those. Yeah. So an actual use case, we started with a company, we integrated with their Snowflake, we pulled their telemetry data, their usage data. And within that, we found 10 factors that would have predicted past churn up to 96% accuracy. Okay. And by expanding that to 25 factors, we could get to 99.4% accuracy. Now, this is 6 months out from renewal dates. When you go 2 years out, it dropped a little bit, but still in the high 90s. Okay. We put that model live. They were mind blown. And then they said, okay, now we want to add this data and that data and this data. Yeah. And we were just frank with them, like, it's not worth the cost.
That's right.
The model is performing excellently.
Yeah.
And it's highly predictive. And we're even tuning it up based off your input to not want to miss it, to catch even more that maybe aren't at risk. You don't need me to add Zendesk support ticket data and survey data and gong call recording data and prior renewal history. We just don't need it, because we have a highly, so they were worried about all of our CRM is so bad. Everyone likes to say that our CRM is so bad. Yeah. I don't give a shit. I can get a highly predictive model just looking at one of a subset of classes of data and only some data properties within that. And so I think people think there's a higher barrier here than is actually required.
See, I think both of you have hit on maybe the biggest takeaway of today, right? This is one of the biggest takeaways of today. I was recently in a meeting, so you'll appreciate this, Keith, because this is use case grounded, where we were going to gather data for the customer for agentic, just for customer service use case.
Yep.
Just asking the question, what's the containment rate of a service ticket? 100%, 80%, 60%, 40%, 20%. Now, if you could figure that out to scale and then compare it to call centers, you can make some really important decisions on the use of an agentic chatbot versus a call center, right? Mm. Of course, the client's like, ooh, that's great. You could capture that. Then we'll add this, we'll go here and get this data that's been scraped. We'll put it on top. We'll add a few more. And I remember their CEO, their Alistair equivalent, the voice of reason, says, we're not building a frontier model here. We're trying to solve a business problem. And I wrote that down. And I'm going to say that in the future when I hear people saying, adding data only makes it better. No, it doesn't, unless you're trying to build inference like OpenAI is doing, right? So I think this is really important that, and in data science, they call it quintessential data, right? Like that very pure or fit for purpose type data that you're talking about. So anyway, for everybody listening, I think that's something that you should absolutely think a lot about. And that is, you only need enough of the right data to get the insight. The more you add, to get technical here, the more noise you are potentially introducing.
And if you're not operationalizing the insight, then you're just spinning your wheels.
That's right.
Like if you're not using some outcome of, let's say, a churn prediction model, since I've been using that use case, if you're not actually operationalizing it in some meaningful way, if you're not putting in the hands of the people that can intervene, if you're not automating workflows based off the insights, if you're not doing something about it, it doesn't matter. You're better off just having your QBRs and having calls every 90 days. Right.
That's right. I mean, that's why, Keith, I've always thought of technologies like AI for go-to-market. Like, how do we measure it? And this is going to take us to our next topic. How do we measure it? I say, put it up against lifetime value customer acquisition costs. They go, well, that's old school. I'm like, that's school.
That's right. Yeah.
That's school. I mean, that's what you're saying. Like you have to operationalize it so then I can measure it saying, well, okay, how is this AI actually improving lifetime value? And then you say, well, it doesn't, but we're more productive, which leads to our second topic I want to get right into here. And that is, let's start talking now about how do we map the practical application. We've talked about churn here. I love that one. To purpose-driven outcomes for a business, such as growing ARR, creating more visibility for the next 2 years. Maybe if you're owned by private equity, staying on, the value creation plan. Let's talk about that. Now, Alistair, I'm going to start with you on this. You talked earlier about, there's these outcomes that we can get, right? So on a personal level, there's productivity. And then you mentioned like long-standing business ones like, optimization, automation, personalization. But so many people sell artificial intelligence, especially the artists known as generative AI, based on, well, it makes you more productive. But why is productivity not really the best way to sell AI into an organization? Why is that a dead end?
I think it's a dead end. I mean, in the sense that, first of all, like, I think everybody ought to be, putting the decision on their desk, and you got a friend with 140 IQ, and that's just going to be table stakes to be a competitive professional, kind of have that assistant at your side. So great. And there's probably some use cases in coding where, the big group of people under the bell curve get more productive, but that's going to become table stakes. To me, chasing that just ends up being, a headcount thing. Okay, great. Take out 5% of our headcount and nothing changes, right? It's kind of a race to the bottom. It's uninspiring. It doesn't really change the outcome for your customer or your business or your culture. Uninteresting. I mean, important to do, but table stakes and uninteresting as a goal. To me, the goal is, and I always try to put this back into a business context and outcome context. And I get this from talking to, the CEOs of our best customers, thinking about some of our own experiences. If you imagine a board meeting for any company that has recurring revenue, whether it's a IoT company or a enterprise SaaS company, whatever it happens to be, the discussion in the boardroom has been so skewed to what are we doing to grow new revenue, and all this endless discussion about, demand gen tools and all that spending on the front end. And that was the discussion up until, like, say 21. The discussion now is we have a recurring revenue stream from an amazing set of customers. So, hey, management team, hey, Mr. CEO, Mr. CFO, Mrs. CCO, what are we doing to optimize that? And, we are, just kind of prehistoric in our ability to have that conversation at a boardroom level, in terms of what's the health of that book of business. Then we get to the things that I think we're doing right now that I think are, breakthroughs, frankly. Can we be predictive about churn, not just to report it, but to improve it? Can we be predictive about expansion so that we can not only improve net revenue, but also know where to point resources? So I think, the basic understanding about how to take a recurring book of business and increase its growth and profitability at, highly kind of, optimized investments is the discussion the boardroom needs to have. why aren't we there? Largely because of what we've talked about today. People do not have that kind of predictive understanding about that book of business. So, churn and expansion with Unison, like Keith talked about, is really important. I think it goes further than that, though. It's going to be, now that we know those things and we've started to optimize them,
Yeah.
I think the very next discussion, the one I hope we are having in a year in boardrooms, is what is my optimum investment? To your point, sort of CAC to LTV is absolutely, still the measurement of efficiency in a lot of these businesses. And maybe there's different terms now, but fine. So, hey, management team, now that we know all these things, what's our next best investment? Should we be putting more money into product? Should we be improving support? Are we selling to the wrong people? Should we redeploy salespeople against expansion versus new? On and on and on. And I think the roadmap we're talking about here and the change in the cost of prediction lets us get to that attribution discussion on how people optimize their business over time.
That's right.
Big airlines probably do this now. Lots of people that, the small, businesses that have tons of money. But now for this stream of, all of us, we can have a data-driven, action-oriented conversation about optimizing our business with our boards. That's where we're headed.
I think that's exciting. I'm going to retrace something you said at the very beginning of those comments. And you talked about the idea that, one of the problems with like using productivity, like classic, like 30% more productive if you've got ChatGPT, right? The problem with that, you say, is that it has headcount implications. This is an important thing to focus on for just a second for everybody watching. If you sell, my people are 30% more productive, your chief financial officer is well within their rights then to say, then show me 30% headcount cut next quarter. They're perfectly within their rights to say that when you do that. And what I'm seeing to scale is it creates a chilling effect on AI adoption. Like you will only ask for this once if you are now expected to cut engineers, if you're trying to make an advocacy safer Copilot. So, there's actually research on it. And I think I've shown this to you before, but I think for the viewers, this is important. It's like McKinsey, studied Gen AI. And they're saying, if you look at this cost reduction lens, you're going to miss it. But there's so many reasons why. But the biggest one's you're never satisfied with a one-to-one substitute. That's the biggest reason why. They said, but instead, if you think about the capacity model, the idea that 10 people can produce at the power of 15, now you're getting into a discussion that doesn't have that chilling effect. Now you're getting into discussion about what more can we do. So I just wanted to kind of call that out. But Keith, I want to come back to you now and continue this conversation that Alistair's talking about. So of those board level metrics, we mentioned LTV CAC. That's my favorite one because I like it because like you show a CEO like, or you CFO, I can take you from 2.5 to 3.5. They will literally back up the Brinks truck. But what are some of the metrics, Keith, that you've been able to influence, say, in your work around prediction of churn?
I would say prediction of outcome in general is kind of the space that we're most playing with, and then explaining that prediction to people to operationalize it. So we're looking at the three big use cases I've seen are related to better identification of your best customers, those who close, those who get deep in a sales process, those who continue using you, those that renew, those that expand over time. Churn prediction is an obvious one. How do we identify downgrade or termination possibility early enough to intervene? And then expansion identification, which expansion is super interesting because of how nuanced it is. Like we're talking about these things as churn or expansion, but the reality is when we're building a model for outcome prediction, it's churn for this customer segment of this product line in some window of time, right? It's highly focused. I think if there are CS people on the call, they're very used to having a customer health score that they put on all their accounts. That is actually not real. An enterprise customer is so unlike a no touch or low touch, self-service PLG customer that having one even multimodal health score for them is, to be frank, not accurate. And so then when we have finally moving on to expansion, when we talk about expansion, we're talking about this very specific upsell path, this unit of volume to this product line in these buckets in this customer tier, or cross sell this path from flagship into this add-on, so on and so forth. Okay. So when we're talking about, it goes back to the same numbers that I mentioned earlier that metrics we're reporting on already at our board level, in our investor pitches, It's are we growing the business? Are we doing that via acquisition of new logos? All right, so ICP is directly related to a higher conversion rate and customers that stay with us longer term. Okay, so our sales metrics get better. Are we maintaining our existing customer population? So gross revenue retention, gross dollar retention gets better because we're identifying them earlier. And are we expanding our customer population in a real, meaningful, targeted way, not by happen chance because they happen to say something on a QBR. So you're talking net revenue retention. Okay. These are the same metrics we care about. Productivity is almost like nice to have. It's outside of those. Like when you guys were talking about productivity, what I found is that's actually when I'm going to give you a use case. I'm going to another example use case.
I love it. Analogies are your use cases.
Churn
We're like Hall and Oates.
Another customer of Parative churn prediction model. This is a 20,000 employee company, very large company. Okay, international. They want a churn prediction model. They have a gigantic voice of the customer program, a dedicated team whose whole job is capturing and collecting and reporting and aggregating customer feedback from surveys and tickets and calls and this really robust. They run 11 CSAT surveys and they have people at all different moments in time in a customer engagement. And they're spending, excuse my language, a shit ton of time and money on this CSAT program because they're convinced it's meaningful.
Right.
Hint, hint, there's zero correlation between any CSAT survey response in aggregate for individual users at moments in time, specific.
It's moments in time. It's biased, right?
None of the CSAT surveys had any correlation with outcome, in this case, expansion or churn. We told them that with excitement, we're going to save them, that team that's spending all that time, they can go do something else. When that insight got down to that team, they were so resistant to working with AI, period, even though that was just a side benefit of this discovery we'd done. In my experience, focusing on productivity at an IC level is the biggest, is the fastest path toward having a individual contributor tell you they're not interested.
That's right. That's right. And just go back to something you talked about. By the way, there's so much goodness in what you said. That CSAT investment creates this concept called confirmation bias. And confirmation bias is real. It's like the more you spend on something, the more precious it is to you, even if it turns out not to be that useful. But let's go back to one thing before we kind of get to some wrap-up comments here. You talked a little bit about, don't think of churn just like keep quit. It's not a zeros and ones thing. There's this issue of downgrade. And downgrade is really important because it's not even just about net ARR. Some people watching, you're at a company that's transforming their revenue mix. And if you're successful at like introducing new products that could lead to a higher multiple, say, for the value of your company, a downgrade over a small part of the ARR can still be very, very meaningful if you're trying to take that mix from 10% that product type, say data-driven, to 20%, and then eliminate a little bit of your, dependency, say on media. So downgrade is a really important point you mentioned that needs to be looked at. But what I think it really suggests is that churn shouldn't be looked at as binary, especially now that we have services like Totango and others that can help you segment it a lot. So I love that. I didn't want to let that slip. Questions come in. And before we get to wrap up, though, Keith, you've mentioned a few times Unison, my favorite mode to play my synthesizer in, but I know that's not where you came from. Do talk to us a little bit about, what excites you about the future of Unison and the possibilities.
I think it's taking this rich history of customer data and allowing teams to weaponize it for a real business outcome. Historically, if we want to help a team understand customer data, basically what we do is we take table-based data and we put it into a graph. Hey, here's that same table-based data, but now it's in this tool, or now it's accessibility is how we've typically focused on weaponizing data. Let's take data in Zendesk and put it in Salesforce. Or it's let's take data in Salesforce and put it in Tableau, in Power BI, and let me see my graph, my bar, my pipe. That's typically how we've done this. that's not the same thing as visualization is not understanding. Okay.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
to me, the
Yeah.
interesting thing about kind of all this new tech and these new tools goes back to how do you help a person on the front line responsible for doing a job understand and use data to do that job better. And so, you know, Unison is one way to do that. You know, it's that the idea behind it is, hey, how do we build this customer intelligence engine that, you know, takes first party, second party, third party data, mixes it with these really powerful enterprise grade AI models, and use that to predict some future outcome like expansion readiness, churn prediction, so on and so forth. Okay.
Yeah.
But the reality is, whenever a market matures, the tools and tech in that market eventually become commoditized.
Right.
That's what you've seen with, to be frank, generative AI. I mean, every product, every enterprise software right now is reskinning ChatGPT or Claude and calling their product AI driven.
That's right.
I
Always
get it.
included.
I get it. There's a hype and hope train we're on right now, and like, count me in. I remember when everything was blockchain or Web3. Okay, it's like, cool, I get it. But when that, and there, listen, there's nothing wrong with commoditizing the tech. CSPs are commoditized in a lot of ways. CRMs are commoditized. All the tools eventually become commoditized. You still have to do those tools well. So it's commoditization is not necessarily a problem. But what that means is once the tech becomes commoditized, let's say AI in this instance, the tech itself is not the interesting part. It's how you apply that tech to an actual practical real world scenario that's interesting. Okay. Let's take this to identify expansion opportunities so we can make 40% of our annual revenue growth come from expansion versus new logo. Okay. That is an actual practical outcome that we can drive with the appropriate AI technology that isn't just like, let's get a prompt generator of text field in my product and let's call it AI.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree with you. And we're going to take 2 questions to close here because, hey, we got questions. But I mean, your point, like when you commoditize AI, I think it's like, if you remember going back 30 years almost, there was this big arms race around how many gigs could you get of local storage, right? And then I'll never forget, you know, Steve Jobs. Like, sell the transformational benefit, not the tech. God forbid they try to sell the iPod of 5 gigs in your pocket. People would be like, then I'm going to burn up and die. But instead, he didn't do that, did he? He sold the benefit. So I think you make a huge point here. We got to sell the benefit. That's what people are buying. 2 questions. I'm going to give one to each of you, and we're going to finish with it. We've got 5 minutes. Ken has a question that I will direct to Keith. Arjuna has a question I'm going to direct to you, Alistair. And we'll start with you, Alistair. Actually, we'll start with you, Keith. So Ken Nowell has a great question. Many customers are concerned about the messy state of their CRMs and data hygiene, and therefore hesitant to integrate AI tools, fearing they won't get value from them. Are we overthinking the issue? Will Totango provide guidelines or best practices for data organization to prepare for effective AI tooling? Your best 2 minutes on that one.
That is a great question. Let me say first, AI has a really interesting role in continuously identifying, finding, and fixing data hygiene issues. That is an AI use case. Okay. So let me just say that, put it aside. Let's assume that's not the use case that you're trying to procure AI, let's say Unison in this case, to do. Unison won't clean your CRM data. I think the real goal here, someone on this call mentioned explainability. It's the biggest challenge for AI in the modern enterprise.
I think so.
Is not just explaining in a prediction AI like churn prediction, why is it predicting that this customer is at risk? Like, that's a challenge. But also explaining like what is the critical mass of data needed to get to something interesting. Okay.
Right.
My high level takeaway is, yes, we're overcomplicating it. Let's take a look at what we find first. Don't say they're not going to find anything because my data sucks. Let's see. Let's take a look and see what we uncover. And you might be surprised that even with a reasonably small number of customer records in your CRM and patchy data across those records in the CRM, that you can actually still find a highly predictive 10 factors, like the example I used earlier.
I love that. You know, as Wayne Gretzky says, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So there you go. Or did Kevin Scott say that in The Office? I don't know. All right. Last question. We're at the final zone here. This is for you, Alistair. I'm putting you on the spot here. I'm sure you're going to love this one. Are there any lessons that businesses can learn from the application of AI to predict the results of the recent U.S. presidential election? Thought we'd finish on this one.
Oh, you're going to take me there? I think the lesson is that we all struggle with dealing with probabilistic outcomes versus deterministic outcomes. So, kind of however you thought about the election, it was very clear probabilistically a lot of things could have happened, and one of them did. So when we get into a business context, especially with AI as a prediction machine, we're not doing sort of deterministic math. We're kind of creating probabilities and deciding which probabilities are the right ones to act on, and which ones are safe to act on. So I'd encourage people to kind of get comfortable with this idea that as we think about AI, we're dealing with probabilistic behavior, which means starting to think about and understand, what does accuracy mean? How do I think about the quality of this prediction? And what's the outcome if I do something about it? And if it's it's a low quality prediction and a highly risky outcome, then you need to have a framework to think about that. So just becoming, I think, better at understanding probabilistic things, and knowing that there's going to be a lot of them that are pretty decent outcomes and totally safe to act on, and don't get stuck.
So as Bill Murray said to Sergeant Hulka in Stripes, you move like a cat. I think you answered that question very elegantly, which is a good place to finish this conversation, which has been fantastic. Keith, Alistair, what a pleasure listening to both of you. Karen, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone who joined. That was a hot take discussion with some uncensored comments. And I'm still thinking about Nickelback and AI in the same webinar. This one's a keeper. So thank you all for joining. You'll receive the recording in a follow-up, and we ask that you please take a few moments to share your feedback in a survey. You can also follow Tim, Alistair, Keith, and Totango on LinkedIn. And for those of you who have more questions about our AI intelligence engine Unison that you heard Keith talk about today, you can take out your smartphones, snap a QR code, and get some time with our experts to learn more about it. If you are already a customer of ours, we'll have some follow-up webinars on our roadmap going deeper into that. But we cannot thank you enough for tuning in today. This was an incredibly illuminating discussion. I'm going to rewatch it. So thank you, Tim, Keith, and Alistair, for a great discussion. Everyone, hope you have a great day.